Welcome back. We are going to continue on with our uh, little Space Marine guy here. We're going to try and take him up to what we're calling level 3 with a focus on turning our edge highlighting errors or deliberate kind of accentuations, if you like, into some battle damage. And then there's a couple of areas that we still need to highlight that we didn't highlight last time because we focused just on the blue and the metallics. So we will have a look at those as well. And then I think probably a little bit of kind of environmental stuff as well, particularly around the base and his boots, etc., that kind of thing. And that's probably all we need to take him to level 3. And that might be, for this particular mini, as far as we can go. And then we can start level 4 with a new mini with a slightly different starting point. Well, very different starting point, and use that to our advantage and see where we go on that one as well. Okay, let's have a look, see where we get to. So last time we used Calgar Blue as our highlighting on the blue, and I think if you can see in uh, some of the areas, it's not worked out very well. And again, I wasn't being particularly careful, but maybe that is an amateur thing, right? It's, we the brush control's not as good, or maybe the brush itself is not as high quality, and so it's split, so you get two lines instead of one. Those kind of things can make a big difference. And also where we've put the shade paint on the metallics, that's kind of spilled over onto our blue, onto our pauldrons and bits and pieces. Last time I did do some highlighting on the lead belcher, I also used the lighter gold to highlight some bits on the muzzle, particularly the bottom edge of the holes on the muzzle, because I think that kind of gives it a little standout, and you can see hopefully that's kind of coming through. And then I think that was all I did. So we've still got a little bit of work to do on the leather. We've got a little bit of highlighting to do on the black undersuit because we can use some colors to do that. And like I say, focusing a little bit on the edge highlighting. In particular, this is a really good example down here where we made a kind of a deliberate large splodge on the side of his leg. And I'm going to use that as an example to show you what we can do. All right, let's get into it. So we're going to start again with the Calgar Blue and maybe just look around the model at areas where it's not quite come out how we like, and then we can change it a little bit to get into the battle damage step. Okay, so let's do that. All right. So this area we know we've kind of got as we wanted it. There's a little bit on top of the helmet here. I'm just going to kind of fill that in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the bit that there's a bit here where the brush split, and so we end up with two lines. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger by adding a little bit more of the Calgar Blue just on the edge there, and work my way around the model, finding those areas where I think I can kind of accentuate a little bit of the mistakes. Maybe there's a little bit on this side of the helmet as well. Just going to add in a little bit more blue there. And then we've got this bit on the side of the leg. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to extend that out into a kind of a thin line. So we've got a little triangle shape on the edge, and then it just comes across like something has kind of like made a big chip on the edge and then skitted across as his armor, just maybe like a little trail. I'm going to find a couple of places where we can do that. There's quite a lot on the back. The highlighting on the back of these legs isn't great. And this is very thick on the back of his bit there. So I'm just adding maybe a little bit more just to make it look a little bit more like a scratch. Some there, okay, on the inside of his leg. Okay, and we're just going to use those as examples. And we're going to move to a very dark brown, something like Rhinox hide, because what we're trying to do again is create contrast between the light blue sections and the bit underneath that might have kind of rusted through. And I know that might not be lore accurate, this kind of ceramite armor. It probably doesn't rust, right? But it's quite a nice effect. So what we're trying to do is the dark blue is the main paint on the top of his armor. Underneath that is a primer coat, which is this lighter blue. And then where it's been peeled all the way back to the base metal, it's gone a little bit kind of, well, say rusty for want of a better word, but it's kind of been, I don't know, what you want to call it, eroded to a certain point. So we're going to use the Rhinox hide to demonstrate that effect. And again, just need a little bit on my wet palette. Don't need huge amounts for this because we're only doing small areas. And again, with a small brush. Now, what I want to do is be very careful here because I really want to try and get the brown inside the light blue. Okay, don't want it to come over the edge of the light blue. So I can just touch it inside those areas, maybe a little bit inside that scratch there, and just need to be careful with it. And again, it kind of feeds down the leg. And that's probably all I need to do. That's a nice little example. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but already that looks like a genuine kind of dink in the armor, right? We've split it and you can see the scratch and it feeds its way around the leg. So I'm just going to do the same on all of those bits. There's a little bit on his back here, just on his, I don't know what you want to call that, the little kind of flap of the armor that comes down over his lower back and top of his legs there. Just adding in a little bit of the brown into those areas, making sure we do not go over the edge of the blue. Got this big one on the inside of his leg. Don't know if you can see that on the camera there, but principle is the same wherever we wanted to focus the effort. And it's always worthwhile doing a bit, did a little bit on the top of his knee there actually. Maybe that wasn't deliberate, but I'm just going to turn it into a chip. Like I say, what we're trying to do is maximize the return on our mistakes, or our lack of brush control, I suppose, for want of a better word. And we could, if we wanted nice sharp edge highlighting, we could have done that a little better, right? We could have just taken more time. We could also go back around with the darker blue and tidy up our mistakes. But like I say, for this one, I think we're just trying to get a little bit of battle damage on there. So there's a little bit we did on the top of his helmet, right? Let's feed that in, particularly along the edge. Yeah, because that's a place where impact might happen quite regularly, right? And we're just trying to feed it in subtly without overdoing it and making sure we're staying inside that light blue. All right, and that's probably it. Just had a nice couple of areas where we can show that damage. It looks very deliberate. It looks like we meant it to be there. And we can put as much or as little as we like of that. Okay, and I think that's probably all we're going to do today. Nice little bit of chipping on there. And now we're just going to go around and tidy up the rest of it with some Macragge blue. And this again you can do in your own time. It's just that this section inside the shoulder pads, I noticed where the shade paint has kind of spilled over, probably needs a little bit of tidying up. There's probably a couple of areas where we can do that. So you can do that in your own time. And then that's the blue taken care of. One thing that we're going to do to add to the addition of the highlights is we're just going to work some of these ridges on the back of his black undersuit with light grey. Okay, and I'm using classic Dawnstone for this effect because it's quite a nice contrast. We're looking for little lines just to sit on top of the ridges of his undersuit. Take your time with this. Again, it just helps it stand out. We're just creating more contrast, right? That's the key. Where you can get access to the undersuit. Pick the ridges, little line on top. Try and pick those areas that you want to stand out the most. Maybe there's a little bit of highlighting then to be done on this black area with the gun, and again we can just use the Dawn Stone for that. Just edge highlighting. Just working our way around. Okay, so take your time with that. Go as little or as much as you like. Just trying to create a little bit more contrast. All right, which reminds me, we had that little bit on the top of the weapon. We just had that little bit in here, and again we can come back to our dark brown and just put in a little bit of rust effect on there, on the edges, just where we overdid a little bit of the edge highlighting, just to make it look a little bit corroded, a little bit deliberate. Okay, and the last thing we're going to do before we have a look at environmental stuff is to get a little bit of bright orange just over the top of his eyes, and I'm going to use for me I'm going to use an even smaller brush, something with a kind of very pointy tip just for control. And this is not my forte. If you've got kind of problems with googly eyes or painting in small spaces, then you know this is optional. I'm going to give it a go. You can always paint over it again if you need to. So I'm going to again make sure you've not got too much paint on the brush, but you do need it to come off as well. And I'm just going to put a little line across the lens. Need enough paint that it comes off. One on one side. One on the other. And that just gives them a little bit of an extra, sparkle in the eye. Pretty good. And I think that is probably going to be our level 3. And you can imagine on something like, well, it's got one of these Terminators here, for example. If I was to put the edge highlighting across here, on that front edge, you could have quite large sections that kind of scratch back onto the top of that, and they would be nice and visible then when the model is sitting on the table. Those ones, particularly the ones we've done on the leg, is probably visible, is decently visible. And I think you want to kind of focus on those areas that people are going to be able to see. If you're playing a game, it's always a kind of a 5-foot kind of inspection, isn't it? And I think he's going to look great from that. But if someone was to have a closer look, they're going to see a little bit of that battle damage and bits you've done. And you can focus on the knee areas, on the front, on the top of the helmet, maybe on the top of his power pack, whatever suits you. Okay, and that's it, I think, for the highlights we're going to do for level 3. We probably just want to have a little bit of a look at some of the environmental stuff. And what I mean by that is, how does he connect with his base? Is there something that about the area that he's in, or the planet that he's on, or the whatever it is he's standing on. In this case, we've put him on kind of some sandy stone bases, maybe with a kind of a darker mud thing in the in between. So I'm going to use a light color to get onto his boots. And there's a couple of ways of doing that, but today we're going to use an enamel effect. You don't have to do that. You can do it with just another thinned acrylic paint if you like. But some of the enamel products that are around today, they're ready to use out of the bottle. They just give that a little bit of extra connection between the model and the base. All right, so I'm going to use a couple of things for this. I'm going to use Ammo's Earth Nature Effects, okay? And like I say, it is a enamel paint. So it is workable in that sense, i.e. you can kind of manipulate it with some kind of thinner, low odor thinners, kind of very easy to use. And this stuff can go straight on. It's very liquid, so you just need to be a little bit careful with how you put it on. But really, we're just going to focus on around his boots. And I think it kind of matches a nice color. Have a look at that color with what we've kind of got on the base. And that's what we're trying to do, is just tie him into his base a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to just dab my brush straight in and then just apply this around the creases of his boots. Let it run around the natural kind of seams on his armor, just in the bottom section there, maybe a little bit on top of the shoe, coming up just over the top of his boot. I think that's probably about as much as we'd expect. It's quite subtle, so don't overdo it, because you want to see the effect when it's dry. See how it's kicked up onto his dust, has kicked up from the planet onto his armor. Okay, so we're just going to feed it in there nice and gently, and when it's dried, should just give that nice kind of dusty effect, dusty feel to his armor and his boots. You can go, if you're on, let's say, a red planet, like you've got a Martian theme or whatever, that might be more obvious and might kick up more. And again, you can get enamel products that suit that color scheme. Or you might find using pigments suits you well, and you can use those kind of neat or mixed with water, with some kind of pigment fixer or whatever. Is probably better, because otherwise they do come off on your fingers a little bit, but the effect is the same. We're just trying to get a little bit of connection between him and his base. Okay, so we're just going to let that dry. So that's probably as much as we're going to do for level 3. We've done a little bit of additional highlighting on the black and on his eyes. We've turned a little bit of the edge highlighting mistakes we made, or deliberate kind of splodges, into some battle damage. We've given him a little bit of connection to the base using some enamels for some dust. Probably the last thing is to maybe get a little bit of scenery on there. There's all these kind of different types of tufts you can put on. Again, something contrasty. You don't want too much on the base of your model that draws attention away from the model itself. But I'm thinking maybe this is going to look, one of these, nicely placed on one of his rocks there, is going to work quite well. I like to use tweezers to do it. Doesn't really matter, you can just peel them off, but otherwise it can be a little bit tricky to kind of get in. And they should have nice sticky bases, but if not, you can just use a dab of super glue on there. I'm just going to stick this front and center, I think. Feed it onto the model there. Okay. Now, I think we're going to call that level 3 complete. And that is as far as we're going to take this guy. We've got to wait for the enamel to dry, but you get the idea there. And you can add more layers of that enamel as well if you wanted, kind of lighter at the top, darker at the bottom, whatever suits. Otherwise, I think he's ready to go. Oh, we were going to do a bit of work on the leather, but let's call that level 4 to kind of make a little bit more leather look. And again, some people do a really great job on making their leather look like real leather. It's still a work in progress for me, for sure, but we'll see what we can do in terms of contrasting browns to make it look a little bit more worn. Otherwise, level 3 done. Again, thanks for joining me, and I will see you again next time.